Hello everyone, and welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to take a look at the Inibuilds A300 and, well, by association, the A310 as well. Now, I've created this tutorial because there's a huge amount of material on the Inibuilds A300 and A310 by Inibuilds themselves, and there's a very good tutorial as well by Airline to Sim. But this is such a complex aircraft and is modeled so well at the depth of systems and etc. That it's very difficult to not get sidetracked by showing what all the buttons do and all the systems do and the capabilities of the model. And so that's what I found, that sometimes it happens with tutorial about the Inibuilds, and they tend to sidetrack a little bit from the normal operation. Now, that aside, the level of this plane is, I don't think I will exaggerate in saying that the Inibuilds A300 and A310, well, the Beluga as well, together with them, are quite possibly the best models ever made for X-plane. The reason is, like, the every single aspect of the plane is phenomenal, like from the 3D modeling to the textures, to the sounds, to the systems. The whole package is incredible. We have fantastic developers out there that excel in certain areas, but very rarely you find something that literally every single area is the best it can possibly be. So it definitely deserves, although I don't like to throw around the term too easily, but it is definitely deserves to be called a study level aircraft. And as such, it can, and it probably should be flown following as close as possible actual real world procedures. So you can literally open the FCOM of this plane and flying it A to B, practically doing everything that is on the FCOM. I say practically because, of course, this is a sim. It's a single pilot environment, and there are things that we don't do, like I still refuse to do external walkarounds and such, but you can simulate literally 95% of what is in the FCOM, and that's what I've done. I've taken an original Airbus FCOM from a specific airline, and I've adapted it. Now, it is quite complicated going through the FCOMs that we can find available online, because there are different models of engines, there are different models of FMS, there are a lot of different configuration of this plane. And well, first of all, the A300 in its original incarnation, it was much more of a steam gauge airplane, and so the one simulated by Inibuilds, it's actually a much more modern A300. So if we take a look inside, the avionics here are practically everything inside the cockpit is actually from an A310. So I haven't studied too in detail the history of when it was changed and how, but the final result we have is actually practically an A310 inside. So I'm working on the basis of an A310 FCOM, and I've adapted it. Now, it took me quite a few weeks, I would say 4 or 5 weeks, possibly 6, to go through every single item on the FCOM, deleting what wasn't applicable, adding certain things, making it possible to operate it single pilot environment, even though it is a plane with definitely a high workload. You can see the sheer amount of switches and etc. But it is a fantastic compromise. Some people call it the Airbus Boeing hybrid, and it is in a way, because it still has a yoke and you still need to trim the aircraft, but it has a lot of automatic systems and a lot of electronics as well. So it's an incredibly fascinating plane. But now, without further ado, let's not lose ourselves. And what we're going to do, I'm going to pull up this that I've created. Now, as you might have noticed, the livery I've decided to use is Dan Air, so an old, defunct, as we call it, airline from the UK. And a good friend of mine has recently created a virtual airline simulating the operation of Danair and other defunct European airlines. But the VA has been called Danair Virtual. So as a little tribute to the airline, I'm one of the management members of the virtual airline, and I wanted to create this one as well as a tool for the members of the virtual airline. So that's why the little logo Danair Virtual you see on top. And as I said, it does apply to both the A300 and the A310. But let's get straight away into the plane. Now I will try not to get lost in explaining how the systems work. You know, I love in my tutorials to explain how the systems works, how the hydraulic works and electrics and etc. I won't be doing this time because, as I said, especially in the tutorial by Inibuilds, there's plenty and plenty of material about that, and what I was missing is purely just how to operate it according to normal procedures, the standard operating procedures, and A to B, A to Z, so gate to gate, power up to shut down. Now let's get into the FCOM. Now the first page is just a little bit of an introduction, how to check the technical condition of the aircraft, weather briefing, NOTAMs, flight plan, and again in the sim, of course, this is relatively important. The main most important thing is to generate a flight plan with sim brief. The Inibuilds birds, let's say, they have an integration with sim brief. So if you generate your flight plans with sim brief, which I strongly suggest anyway, because it's an incredibly powerful tool, then you can import directly the flight plan from sim brief, and it populates it in your FMS, and it does a lot of other interesting things. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Now, let's start with the actual first page. Safety exterior inspection. So completion ensure that the aircraft and surroundings are not obviously unsafe for operation. So on arriving to the aircraft, now of course this is a sim, so this will be okay, but we'll have a look at this anyway. So an actual pilot, when arriving to the airplane, will, while accessing the airplane, will check a couple of things. Primarily nose wheel chocks. We check that the nose wheel chocks are in place. Well, we have wheel chocks, not sure about the nose ones. We have landing gear doors. The landing gear doors, we need to make sure that they're closed, and that we're talking about the main landing gear doors. Every time the gear extends, they open to let it out, and then they close again. We want to make sure that they're closed and there's no personnel inside of them doing repairs or anything like that. APU area, we check that the APU area is free. There we go. So when we start it, we don't have any problems here, and that's the APU exhaust. Then we step inside and we go ahead with the preliminary cockpit preparation. Now, as you can see here, the following procedure performed by the pilot non-flying ensures that required safety checks are made prior to the application of electrical power to avoid inadvertent system operation and danger to aircraft and personnel. Included is APU starting and establishment of electrical and pneumatic power. So basically this is safety checks to make sure that nothing moves outside. So if there is ground personnel around the wings, around the flaps, the gears, we make sure that nothing starts inadvertently, and especially we don't damage the aircraft. Now ignition is off. Ignition will be up here, and we make sure that it's off. Wipers 1 and 2, left and right, they're off. Throttle levers, we'll check they're off. Reverse levers, which are these, we check that in the stow position. Fuel HP valves, it's 1 here and 2 here, we check that they're off. And landing gear lever over here is down. Now let's see, can make it a little bit brighter. No, actually it gets darker, so yeah, that should be good enough. Now rear and overhead circuit breaker panels, they are not modeled in the Inibuilds, so there's no risk of anything being the way it shouldn't be, but these are all the circuit breakers. There's quite a lot of them. Batteries and emergency inverter. So battery 1, 2, 3, we check that they're off. Now, I normally operate the overhead from here, but I think that given the complexity and size of this, for certain things I will show this view so we can have a better understanding. Now, as we said, battery 1, 2 and 3 check off. The batteries are here on the second panel from the left. Battery 1, 2, 3, they're off. There's no lights and we know that they're off. We check the voltage above 25 volt. So we come up here on top of the overhead panel, and this switch over here, the one on the right, gives you battery 1, battery 2, battery 3, and you can see the voltage here. So we are above 25. You can see if I go to essential, there's no power. But battery 1, 2 and 3, they're all above 25. So at this point, we do battery 1, 2 and 3, auto. And we check that the flow bars are in line. 1, 2, 3, so the flow bars is the green bars. And we check that they're in line. AC emergency on inverter light is on, and it's this one, blue. And the DC essential on bat light, we check that it's on, and it's this one over here. And that's for the electric part. And next, we're going to have a look at the hydraulic. So do not pressurize the green hydraulic system without ground clearance. Yeah, of course, the hydraulic systems are here at the moment. They're not powered. The hydraulic system is the only one that can be pressurized without engine power, because it's an electric. It doesn't. Well, it has an electric pump. So of course we don't want to pressurize it, just in case then that makes any surfaces outside the aircraft move. Now we check a few things here. APU fire protection, and we will be starting the APU before the engine, so we do the fire protection system test now. So APU fire handle is this one. There are 3, engine 1, engine 2 and APU. We check that the fire handle is in and latched. We check that the loop A and B, PB means push button, are in. So these are the push buttons. We check that they're in. The squib test push button over here, this one on the top left, we press and we see the light, squib light check illuminated. Loop test push button, press and hold. And then we read here, it says that the loop A, it comes on with loop warning activation, and then after a few seconds, loop B, it also illuminates associated with APU fire warning activation, and APU fire handle illuminates. And then loop test push button, release. Loop A warning and APU fire warning activation disappears, and after a few seconds, the loop B warning disappears. That's done performance, so we can safely use the APU now. Electrical external power, if available light is illuminated, on. So the available light for the external power is here, is not illuminated. That's because we don't have external power. So we go in our EFB over here, we go to ground ops, we go to ground services, and we click on external power. We can click on anything else. If you want, you can start, I don't know, a fuel truck and a catering, a passenger bus, and etc. But they do not actually physically, you don't need those to load the passengers. Unlike, for example, the Flight Factor 767, 757, you do not need the bus to load passengers, or the fuel truck to load the fuel. So it doesn't really matter, it's only aesthetic. Once we have connected external power, so the GPU, the ground power unit, we have available, and we can click available. Now a lot more systems come to life, and you can hear all the avionic ventilation and everything now. The plane is a lot more alive than it was before. Now, after the external power has been put on, now you could decide to use the APU or not. Now in real life, of course, especially at a major airport like here, you would have all sorts of services. The only reason why you would use the APU so early is for air conditioning. If you were in somewhere very hot or very cold, and you didn't have a ground card for air conditioning, you will start the APU. But most airports in the world now have limitations for the APU, very often around 15 minutes before departure. So we're not going to sit here with the APU going for the next however long it takes to prepare this plane. So we're going to skip the APU. The temperature is not too bad. I would say we are in London in May, so it should be a perfect temperature. 15 degrees, that's a cold day. But it's fine, we'll leave it. We'll keep the passengers with their jumpers on. But let's see. No, there's no... That's funny, I thought there was only an air start unit, but there's no air conditioning unit. But it's fine. We really don't want to operate the APU for that long. So we continue. Cockpit lights as required. Now, cockpit lights is a few different knobs to control the cockpit lights. Nothing on the overhead. One over here, captain. Over here, that's for the background lighting. And then main instrument panel float. And this one is not necessarily needed during the day, but we'll put it up a little bit. Then same thing on the other side, only one, because the floodlight controls both of them. And then here on the center pedestal we have the pedestal and panel. So the outer part of the knob does the pedestal and center panel, and then the inner part over here does the overhead. And that's everything done. Not too many switches compared to other planes, so that's quite handy. Now, where we over here, electrical power, a scan electrical power panel, we check that no amber light illuminated except Gen 1 and Gen 2, so generator 1 and 2 fold light. So this is the electrical panel that's only 2 folds, as expected, because the planes are not running. The plane is not running, the engines are not running. Now, probe window heat, we check that it's off. Over here, probe window heat, check that is off. Ventilation, check all light off. So let's have a look at that like this, as we said. Ventilation panel, so whenever you have here ventilation, electrical power, you have the relevant panels. This is the title of the panel, so electrical power. Here you have vent, which is this one over here, ventilation panel. All lights are off, and the on-ground overboard green floor bar is in line. This one over here that goes to the overboard, it's in line. Annunciator lights, auto test, push button on. So here we're checking that all the lights in the cockpit are working. You can see here, annunciator light. You also hear the wind shear, and that's all supposed to happen. It's not modeled. Fuse blown bulbs are not modeled, so this is a bit redundant in the sim, but we'll do that anyway. And if you want, you can read everything that is supposed to come up, but no time for that now. APU bleed on. Now, APU bleed on would come if you had started the APU bleed for the aircon at the beginning. We haven't, so at the moment we leave it where it is. We check that the parking brake is on, and it isn't because we have the chocks, but we can put the parking brake on. And we check that the accumulator pressure here is in the green, and recharge if necessary. Now, it isn't in the green while the plane is off, and of course it doesn't have hydraulic running. The pressure for the braking system is held by an accumulator, but it can be depleted. Now, if I start pushing the brakes and releasing them, every application of the brakes I do depletes some of the pressure, as you can see. So we need that, otherwise, as you can see now, the parking brakes that I reapplied have only a tiny bit of pressure. They don't have enough pressure. So what we need to do, we need to activate the, as they say here, the accumulator pressure indication must be in the green band. If required, use the electric pump and PTU, the power transfer unit, on the yellow hydraulic system to recharge the brakes accumulators. So we go up here, and we have the hydraulic systems. Electric pump, let's see how that works. If we take ECAM, we put the hydraulics. There we go. As you can see, everything is in orange. There's no power to the hydraulic systems. We press the green and it pressurizes the green. Full power is 3000 psi. And that's powered, but we need the yellow to pressurize the accumulator. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna start the PTU, the power transfer unit. Once this reaches 3000 psi, you can see all the pressure is up, and now the parking brakes are actually at a good pressure. That's it. We can leave it running, the PTU, because we need to do another test. We need to run another test. Just check that parking brake pressure is 1500 psi or more. Parking brake must be applied before performing the steering inspection to allow removal of chocks and to check brake wear indicator. Now, alternate braking system. The purpose of this check is to verify before the first flight of the day the efficiency of the alternate braking. So chocks, they are in place. Brake anti-skid, alt on. So we're now in normal on. We need to switch to alt on. Parking brake off. Brake pedals, apply maximum pressure on both pedals. So now I'm using the actual pedals, the actual brakes. If you have a button, you can use a button. There we go. On the brake pressure triple indicator, pressure must build up symmetrically without delay on left and right sides. With full pedal deflection, pressure must be between 2000 and 2700. So as you can see, if we use the brakes, it works and it holds the pressure. The pressure doesn't go down because we still have the hydraulic pump. At this point, we can put back brake pedals released, parking brake goes back on, and brake anti-skid goes back to normal on. We do not need the hydraulics anymore, so PTU off and electric pump off. Speed brake handle, we check that is in retract position and disarm. Speed brake handle, it is retracted. When it's armed, you can see the red band at the bottom. So we check that it is retracted and disarmed. So retracted means not in this position, but in that one over there. Slats flaps handle, check if under position disagrees with slats flaps position, set handle to corresponding position. So the handle is over here, and we can see set to 0 and 0. This is a slightly more quirky configuration of the slats and flaps. So we don't have degrees like in the Boeing, we don't have config 1, 2, 3, 4 like in modern Airbus, but we have a combination of slats and flaps. So slats 0, flaps 0, and slats come out one notch and flaps don't, so we have 15, 0, and then from there onwards we have slats 15, 15, flaps 15, 20, and then slats 30 and flaps 40 for landing configuration. So we check that it's on 0, and we check that the flaps and slats indicator corresponds to their position, so 0 and 0. As you see, I've explained the system, I've explained the flaps, and I shouldn't do that. As I said, should leave that to the other videos. I'll resist the temptation. Now, cockpit preparation. Now we're actually going to start the actual cockpit preparation. So it is a general rule to extinguish all white lights for all systems during the scan sequence. These actions are therefore not listed here. So as we go through the panel, all these white lights, we're going to extinguish them, minus the fuel pumps until we're refueled. Now, fuel pumps may be left off until refueling is completed if required. So that's what I just mentioned. Now, gear pins and covers, we checked that they're on board. You can't really do that in the sim, but I wanted to keep that. It's a classic. And then we start with the overhead panel. IRS 1, 2, and 3. So the IRS are up here on top, at the very top. 1, 2, and 3. Yes, that's odd. 3 is in the middle, but that's how they are. in all other planes with 3 IRSs, then number 3 is in the middle, because it's not accounting, but it's saying 1 is pilot 1, 2 is pilot 2, and then the 3 is the redundancy. So 1 feeds the avionics on the left, 2 feed the avionics on the right, and the 3 is the one in the middle that is redundant and then can supply either systems. That's why it's designed that way. So we start put enough 1 and then 2 and then 3. We check that the BAP operation light goes off and the align mode comes on. You can have a look at and read all this, but we don't need it for normal operation. Now, FMS CDU in a key press. Go on the FMS here. See if it's big enough. A little bit closer. There we go. Now, in a key press. FMS CDU align IRS prompt press. It isn't there. The align IRS will be here, but before we can align the IRS, we need to give them a position for them to align to. So that would be a latitude and longitude. We don't have them at the moment, so we can simply enter an airport, and from the database it will pick it up. We have a plan, so I've saved the scene brief plan. So once I enter the departure and the destination airports, Inibuilds is smart enough that it picks up the flight plan that I saved. Otherwise, you would only enter the departure and destination, and you would have to enter manually all the flight plan. But we insert that, it picks it up from the database, and now we have latitude and longitude, and we have the align IRS prompt. An even better way of doing this, which is a bit of a treat in the INI, is make sure you have the radio panels this way, which is an option in the EFB. We can go to ACAR main and we can request company route. Press it, wait for a second, it blinks, and then we have company route upload done. Because on top of uploading the route, it gives you as well everything else from the flight plan. So the cruise flight level, flight ID, the temperature and tropopause, and the winds. So this is really, really handy. Now, the position it gives to align the IRS is the standard position, the generic position of the airport. Now, you could be picky and then decide to align it to the parking gate. It's not necessary, but if you wanted to do it, let's have a look at it. So EGKK, we are parked at stand 52. So airport, we go and pick up the INS coordinates, and we can see here gate 52 is north 5109.5, so quite different. So to change it, we click here on the left. Now the arrows appear, and now we can modify that. Every degree requires a few clicks, but there we are, 51095, and you could do the same then with the longitude, which is 1005, not the other way around. As I said, it's not necessary, everything works exactly the same, but you can do it. There we are. Now that we have the correct latitude and longitude, we pressed align IRS, and now this is done, and it will send the position to the IRSs, but once they are aligned. At the moment, if you go up here, you can see the system display for IRS 1, 2 and 3, and here in the position, once it's aligned, you will get the coordinates. But we need still now, if you move to heading status, the heading, we don't have it because we're not aligned, but it gives you the status. It gives you how many minutes left to align, and we still have 7 minutes to align. There we go. Now, ISDU check valid coordinates have been sent. As we said, we cannot check it at the moment. So we continue with the rest. Cabin signs, no smoking, auto, seatbelts on. Calls, we check that the call is extinguished. Over here is extinguished. Hydraulic power, blue, green, yellow reservoirs within normal range. It says on ground, system not pressurized, quantity index needle should, no, indicator needle should be in the outer green sector for any outside air temperature. For OSE below -10, above 20, the needle may be below, if it was -10, or above the upper small green arc to up to 2 needles width. But we are at a fairly standard OET, actually 15, exactly standard. So this is where it should be, within the smaller upper green band. Flight recorder. We check that the flight recorder, let's take this view. We check that the flight recorder, where is it? Ground control is on. So we record even the conversations in the cockpit, rather than only when we start the engines. We check that the FDR and the FDAU lights are extinguished, and those are here. Can't quite see it, but they are there. If we did the initiator, you will see the FDR and the FDAU. We check that those are extinguished. ISDU off. We'll leave it to off, it doesn't really matter. External light as required. So the scan, or the overhead scan, is classic Airbus scan, left to right, every individual panel, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We go from the bottom to the top. So we've done the first one, and then we go and do the second one. External lights over here. Remember the title of the panels to find it. Strobe is in auto, and beacon in the off position. Now, yeah, I pressed the beacons which started the cabin announcement, which are very well simulated, but fine, we'll keep that in the background. So the beacon we check that is off, and the nav and logo lights, they're not required by law, and they're required only during the day, during the night. But it is common practice to keep them on, so we put them into system 1. There's 2 bulbs. If system 1 fails, you can use system 2, but system 1 is good for now. We then check the pitch trim, yaw damper, and ATS, so the auto throttle system, the yaw damper and the pitch trim. We can start them and put them on. Little caveat, as you can read here, the pitch trim will automatically spring back to the off position if the IRS alignment is not yet complete. So if we do that, it goes back until the IRS are aligned, so we need to leave that off for now. The rule said that all the white lights go off, even if they're not mentioned here, so always remember to extinguish any white light. We go to engine fire handle 1 is latched, so we do exactly the same test that we did for the APU. We check the squib. And there we are. And it says loop A light comes on associated with loop warning activation. After a few seconds, loop B light also illuminates associated with engine 1 fire warning activation, and engine 1 fire handle illumination comes on. That's it. Fuel crossfeed. So at this point we're doing the next panel. Fuel panel. These we said we leave them on for now. Fuel crossfeed, check cross line. So this one is horizontal, this one is vertical, so it's a cross line, it's not in line. Isolation valves, LP valves, so isolation valves here, we check that they're in line, and the LP valves, low pressure valves here, that they're in line. For each of flight, you could check that the crossfeed goes to inline once you press it, and once you press it again, it goes back to cross line. Landing gear initiation, we check normal indication. There's landing gear panel over here. We check that it's in the green, and it matches what it shows on the main landing gear panel. Again, 3 green lights. Cockpit voice recorder, we press and we do the CVR test. We can see the needle moving, and then when you release, the needle drops back down. Cabin pressure, so we go back down to the next panel over here, and we have cabin pressure. Auto press rate limit knob is on normal, so this knob over here is pointing at the normal. Rate light check extinguish, rate light would be here, and that would come on, of course, if it was active. So we check that that one is extinguished. Check cabin altitude, differential pressure, and cabin vertical speed for logical indication. So we are on the ground, practically at 0 feet. We are 200 feet, so that makes sense. Cabin altitude, vertical speed is 0 because we're not moving, and differential pressure between inside and out is on 0. Crew oxygen, it's over here. Oxygen, crew oxygen, check indication between 1400 and 2000 psi, and we are there. System low pressure, we check in the green sector, and normally is in the green sector. It goes in the green only if I press that, but we not too worried about that in the sim. Emergency light arm, so we go to the last panel over here, and there we go. You see, we missed that. This is why lights coming off, so we need to start the probe heat and the window heat, and then we come here, emergency exit light, we arm it. Compartment temperature, econ flow as required, and max cool air is required. If we had a very low amount of passengers, so we didn't need the full force of the air conditioning, we could put econ flow. And likewise, if we had a lot of passengers and we were in a very hot place, we might want to use max cool. But we're in London, so no problem. The cabin temperature, we can check it in a couple of different ways. This is a single indicator, and we can move these, and we can see the temperature is the same all over. Or we can use the ECAM over here, and we can press condition. You see the temperature is 15 degrees. If you ever move this one and you see an excess, this is not a fault of the air conditioning system, but it doesn't indicate here the temperature because you have selected it here and is indicating it on the gauge. To make sure you don't have any X, you put it on CRT, which is this screen. This is the CRT screen, so that's what this means. And we are. It has a habit to keep it a little bit too hot once we start, so we'll take it down a little notch. That's all done. Now tune VHF com frequencies. So at this point we've done all the overhead and that's completed. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna tune the radios. So we will go to tune and we would set our frequencies for a delivery for the 80s. If we were online on VATSIM, this is the time we would set all the frequency. Airfield data, obtain necessary data for system initialization and cockpit preparation. This should include runway news, altimetry settings and weather data. ATC tower temperature be used for all takeoff calculations. So we can do this in a couple of different ways. Now we can go on the tablet, go back to the main screen, go to ATIS. Now that we have loaded the plan from SimBrief, if we press here, it fetches automatically because it knows where we are and where we're going. So you have here the meter, but also we do something quite nice, which is going on to ACAR, ATC, weather request. Now ATIS would come out only if a VATSIM controller was online and that was available. So I don't have VATSPI open, so we put AGKK, we give it a try, send the request, and in the messages, so if you press ACAR messages, we have now the ATIS. That's because somebody is online at Gatwick. So this is very handy because it tells us which runway is in use. So we can also print it, and a piece of paper will come out from the printer over here. If we click on it, once it's printed, it will stick it there, and we have all the information. This is really, really handy if you're flying on VATSIM. If you were not on VATSIM, or VATSIM wasn't on, we go back to ACAR, ATC, we do a weather request. This time we click meter, and then we enter the airport, we send request, and at this point we receive a simple meter. Okay, so that's the airfield data. So 310, of course, using runway 26 makes sense. So runways used is 26 left. We're getting now all the data we need, so we check the load sheet. Now insert zero fuel weight and fuel on board in the EFB's load sheet according to the data in your flight plan. Let's have a look at that. Flight plan, we need to pick it up. This is the Sim Brief flight plan. That's a ground ops. Load sheet. And here we can enter all the data. So zero fuel weight, we can find it here, is 112.6. So we round it down to be conservative. 112.6. And the fuel on board 18.8, so we round that up. 18.9. We're not on VATSIM, so we're not expecting delays or anything like that. Maybe a little extra APU. Well, let's do 19. And there we go. So 112.6, 112.6, and 19.0 tons. This is in kilos, this is in tons. At this point we can then load. So load, payload and fuel. There we go. So we now loaded. FMS initialization. So we go on to the FMS again. Nav accuracy upgraded. And GPS primary. This means that the IRSs have aligned. So if we go and have a look up there, we now have the position displayed on all three IRS. There we are. FMS database validity check. Press the ref key over here and display aircraft status page. Aircraft status. We check the database validity, which is here and is valid between May the 19th to June the 16th. So that's valid. We check the performance factor agrees with the flight plan. Performance factor is 0. If we had a different performance factor, we would change it, but that's in the sim is not entirely relevant. Performance factor would be based on your specific aircraft. After a few years, the performance might be degraded for several reasons. So you have a degraded performance and you need to put the specific factor over here. Now, flight plan initialization. Init key, press. Init A page is displayed. It doesn't say Init A, but you have the little arrow there. Init A is the first page of the init, and the next page is the Init B. That's it. So Init A has a generic data, and Init B has all the performance data. So CO route or city pair code. So what we did before, we would enter the city pair code, and then it would be completed automatically. If it wasn't, you check or modify the alternate. This is the only thing that it doesn't fetch from the flight plan. So the alternate is going to be Leslie. So we enter that. Lima Echo Zulu Lima. And we put it in the alternate. That's been done. Ignore the none. We just press return and we have the alternate there. Then enter the flight numbers. We have it, flight number and the flight ID. So Dan Air 143. enter cost index as per airline policy if it was not provided by the database when a CO route was inserted. But we have it, so cost index 82. Wow, we're gonna go fast today. Okay, let's keep it fast. Then we have cruise flight level, it's already entered, 360. Tropopause, altitude, that's already been entered, standard. Enter cruise wind, that's been taken as well. If you need these data, they're all on the flight plan. And then the IRS are usually aligned to departure airport reference point coordinates, as we were saying before. However, if the gate coordinates are published, these may be inserted here, which is what we did earlier. At this point, we switch to flight plan A page. Flight plan. The crew must check, modify or insert, as applicable, the flight plan according to the data given by ATIS ATCO MET. Lateral revision at departure airport, select runway, then sit, then trans. So we're gonna check, at this point we will check our plan. Let's see if I can show you the plan. Navigraph doesn't like it. Okay, let's see. Okay, we have Navigraph. And at this point, of course, another great tool is Navigraph, so I hope you use it. This one requires a selection to get all the charts, but it's absolutely worth it. It's so worth it for the little monthly fee. Now, what we do, we now check our SIDS and stars. So, runway 26 left, Novm 1 X-ray departure. So we put that in the box. Click the left button next to the airport departure airport, and now you have the lateral revision and you can enter the SID. Click on SID, runway 26 left, and we set the Novm 1 X-ray departure. That's correct, and we press insert. So now we have the departure. Lateral revision at waypoint for route modification if needed, that's not needed. And then we have the vertical revision, check or enter speed and alt constraint according to the ATC clearance. So let's have a look at the chart here, which is better. Let's take the airport chart. And then we take the departure chart, Novm 1X, and here we would check that the constraints have been entered correctly. So when we start, we're going to Kilo Whiskey 07, first point, and we need to be below 4,000. We have here and below 250 knots. That's quite standard because we are below 10,000, so strange they need to specify that. But anyway, minus 250. And we're going to be at 4,000. It says plus because it's actually plus, so above 2,500. It cannot do both at the same time, like the Boeing and modern Airbus can specify both entries. But it says I need to be above 2,500 and I'll be at 4,000, so I respect both these entries. Kilo Whiskey 09, the same. Midhurst, we're going to be at 4,000, so here we are at 4,000, and then Novma again 4,000. So these have been entered automatically. We then check the flight plan versus computerized flight plan and navigation chart. So we would take our flight plan over there, and we have it over here. So we're going to check that this one has been entered correctly. Now the small letters over here tell you the procedure or the airway, and then the larger letters are the waypoints. So basically what this says, we're departing from AGKK 26 left, and that's correct. We're gonna take the Novm 1X, All these points are part of the same procedure, so the end of the procedure is here, where the seat ends and the first airway starts. So you read it this way: we're starting there by the Novum 1X all the way to Novma, Novum 1X the way to Novma, then we have the Lima 620 to SAM, Lima 620 to SAM, Mike 195 to Loco, Mike 195 to Loco, and then we have a direct to Corul, Aspor, and Xamax. Direct to Corul, direct to Aspor, direct to Xamax. And at this point, we enter the click, check the distance to destination along the flight plan indicator on the progress page. Well, we need to first put the arrival. Well, this is a relatively long haul plane, so traditionally you wouldn't really enter the start and the landing runway at the departure airport, because by the time you get there the weather might have changed, so you will wait anyway, and it would be down to ATC to assign you a star. So you would wait to get in touch with ATC before getting that, but we can get it now already. So we can click star, and we check again on Navigraph. When we get there, we're going to be using ILS 02 via PESEX and Xama 1 Charlie. So ILS 02 via PESEX and Xama 1 Charlie. There we go. We insert it now. As it says, it's not here, it's not part. We could have done that during the cruise. Now check the distance to destination along the flight plan indicator on the progress page. So at this point the progress page gives us a distance to destination, and this is a distance according to following the flight plan. It's not in a straight line. So we check the flight plan, the first page, it gives us ground distance 907, and this is an important check, 910, to make sure that everything has been entered correctly. That matches. Flight plan B page, enter the wind, temperature for waypoints as provided in a computerized flight plan. So if you wanted, you can enter more winds. At the moment, because we enter the cruise winds from the flight plan, it just populates with the generic cruise winds. Now, especially for a relatively shorter haul, it doesn't really matter too much, but if you wanted to be really precise, you could go point by point on your flight plan and check the winds. So let's say at Lorco it has entered 237.54, because that it was predicting on page 1 average wind 237.54, so it is calculating already an average. So it would be quite redundant then to go and enter every single point. And as you can see, the average was between 201 and then further down is 253. That's why it has created an average of 237. So the average is more than good. Now we go back to our FCOM. Secondary flight plan. Oopsie daisy. Yeah, good. Secondary flight plan. This is routinely a copy of the active. However, consideration may be given to the following. Now, secondary flight plan, which is copy the active. We could copy the active flight plan but modify it at a suitable waypoint for an immediate return to the departure airfield in the event of an engine failure. That's what is normally done nowadays on A320s. Now, unless you have failures activated, it is a little bit of a waste of time to do it, but if you wanted to do it, you can do it. Now, just to explain it, secondary flight plan, you could go, now there is a little caveat, on the primary flight plan, if you go on a lateral revision, so left button on any point, you can specify a new route. So if you were in the cruise and you needed to come back straight away, you press on a button on a waypoint in front of you and you can specify new destination. On the second flight plan, according to what the FCOM says, you should be able to do the same thing, but you're not, because all the options are not. So you cannot really do that. So the only way to do it is go into secondary flight plan, make sure that your secondary index, change the from to, and you put EGKK to EGKK. At this point, go on to the secondary flight plan and you can reprogram it like you did the first one. So EGKK, SID 26 left by the Novem 1 X-ray, insert, and at this point we can check it on the ND. So pop up the ND, we switch this switch over here to plan. So here we visualize the plan instead of the map, and at this point we enter then a return direct to EGKK. So if we had an engine failure during departure, let's go to EGKK, the one at the bottom, and then we do an arrival. Start with departure from 16 left, so we would return to 16 left without any arrival. We just do an insert. There we go. So at this point, as we're flying out, we could decide to just go directly to the center fix and do the approach. That's it. But again, whether you do it or not, it's not entirely relevant unless you're planning to simulate an engine failure. There we go. Prog page, set the prog as required. We check that the VOR is tuned automatically by the FMS. So the VOR are automatically tuned, so we have Midhurst, which is quite handy because it said is the one where we're going to, so that is correct. If we wanted to program something else for a particular procedure, we could do that manually, and I'll show that later. At this point, FMS data insertion, gross weight insertion, that's done on the init B page. So we go to init, we go to next page, and we do the weight insertion. So zero fuel weight CG and zero fuel weight, we pick them from the load sheet. Zero fuel weight is here, we've entered 112.6, so we do 112.6, and we have zero fuel weight, and then zero fuel weight CG is here, 26.2. We go here, 26.2, zero fuel weight CG. Lastly, we enter the block fuel, which we said is 19.0. So 19.0, enter the block fuel. This one is already sensed automatically from the tanks, and we match it. At this point, we have predictions based on the cost index that we've entered. We have prediction of time and fuel burn. So if zero fuel weight CG and zero fuel weight are not yet available, it's acceptable to enter the expected values in order to obtain prediction. All this spiel is in regards to, well, real world operations actually. I left it because it's nice to know how it works in real life. Normally you don't get these figures until the plane is fully loaded, and on your way you get your final load sheet. So you can do a provisional entry to have a prediction and then finish it once you have your actual load sheet. Now at this point we need to check these figures, so we take our flight plan and we check everything against, there we go, on the first page. So trip is 10, so it's planning to burn 10.0, which is a lot less than it's planning here, but the time is correct. 0213, 2 hours and 30 minutes against 2 hours and 18 minutes. Now that one, we leave it that way, and then the contingency, which is the route reserve, here is 5%, while here is in 50 minutes, so it's a lot higher here. So we can adjust that and say it's going to be 1.2 to enter it. Be careful, if there's two entries, you need a slash to tell the FMS which data you're entering. So to enter the one on the left, you need to put the bar after the slash after. So at that point you can put it there. Or probably, I never tried this, but you could put a percentage. Yeah, you can. So 10%. And can we clear this entry? No, we cannot. Okay, well, it's fine. We have 1.2. Alternate is 3.1, and that's correct. And then final reserve is 2.2, and that's correct. Now, it is predicting to have quite a lot of extra fuel, and that's given by the fact that I don't think... Yeah, it's not calculating. Oh, taxi 0.4, while taxi here we're predicting 1.0. Here it's a single entry, so you shouldn't need a bar. There we go. Brilliant. So we have enough fuel because we have extra, so we're good, and all of that matches. Going back here. Now, FMS takeoff data insertion. EFB takeoff perf page, which is here, the takeoff perf page. We need to complete that. To complete that, we need to get these figures. How are we going to do that? We have a very handy takeoff performance calculator. So if you've done everything correctly, you can press the FMC data, and it will take automatically from your entry in the FMC this data over here, but only that works only if you've completed all the data entry that we've just done. So the route, the seats, the start, the seats, and so forth and so on. Fetches automatically. You can press on ATIS request, and this one takes automatically the ATIS from Active Sky. Now, I haven't tried with default weather whether that works. I know that is fully implemented for Active Sky, which is another great tool and you definitely need to have. If it doesn't fetch it, you can just enter it manually from your meter. And yeah, that's something I've mentioned before. All this automatic fetching of meter and ATIS, I'm not entirely sure if it works with the default. I'm running Active Sky at the moment. That's it. So we fetch the FMC data, we fetch the ATIS. At this point, we can press compute. And this calculates for us the takeoff speed, so 148, 149, 151, and the flex temperature. Takeoff weight 131.2, we can double check that. We know we've entered it there. Takeoff weight 131.2, and it will actually be 130 burning the taxi fuel. So that's all fine. Now, V1 and VR, insert or verify. So you can either insert manually, there we go, or you can enter, you can press send data, send to FMS, and those will be automatically sent over here. Receive takeoff company data. We have 148, 149. V2 stays at 100 because it tells you V2 needs to be set on the FCU, and we'll do that in a second. The rest, we have thrust reduction, acceleration is all standard, set or check. So the standard is 1000 feet above airfield. You could modify based on a particular procedure. If you were in parts of an airport with a specific terrain, a specific procedure, you could modify manually this now. Now we go on the glare shield, that's all entered, so the FMS is done, it's all completed. We check the EFIS PFD brightness and ND brightness, these knobs over here. One light that I forgot earlier is this one, for the SCU. Now flight path vector or flight directors, this switch over here. So you can see here on the PFD, you can switch between flight directors or non-flight directors. First of all, we put the flight directors, we leave them on. Now they're not showing at the moment because we have the pitch trim off. Now that the IRS is aligned, we can turn it on, and at this point we're gonna have the flight directors. So if you ever don't see the flight director's main culprit, why possibly is the pitch trim switches. So at this point we can, you see, if you press there, you switch between the flight director, which is this cross, and the flight by vector, flight path vector, which is this one over here. We keep it on flight director. We make sure that left is on and the right is on as well, on to flight director. VOR nav ILS switch, this one over here. VOR position is in manual tune. So what that means, the radios here, if you go on the progress page, as we said, the radio is automatically tuned by the FMS. That's why this is blanked, because when you are in nav or ILS position, it's auto-tuned, so you cannot tune anything. You cannot scroll or enter anything here. Only if you put it on VOR, then the tuning will be manual. At this point you can see I can tune something there, and it shows it as well over here. Okay, and it says M for manual as opposed to A for automatic. But we are departing following the nav, so we leave that on nav to auto tune. If is control box, so over here we check that we have what we need. We normally use constraint on departure, and the mode and range. It is recommended, it is recommended to use map mode for takeoff unless the seat is not in the database. Then the PF should use arc or ROSE. So if we were using a VOR departure, we will put it into arc to follow the VOR deviation. But we're in nav, so we leave map. Range is recommended to set minimum range to display the first waypoint on departure or as required for weather radar, so we leave it on 15 and we'll leave it on 60 there to see a little bit more of the plan. FCU, adjust brightness, and there we go, so that's what we just did. Speed Mach setting knob, turn to select V2. V2 was 151, so now we set that on the speed. Oopsie. There we go. Now V2 is selected there, so if we go now on the takeoff perf page, you can see V2 is now 151. The speed Mach setting knob, we push it to activate the preset. Now how does the preset work? This is the V2, so once we take off, the plane will be on a takeoff pitch mode, so it will pitch up to maintain a specific speed based on V2. Once we activate then the profile mode, so instead of pitching up for speed, we will follow the profile, the climb profile, which means accelerating to 250 today. We will need to follow a different speed. Now, as long as we are in profile, so we use the FMS flight plan, we don't need to technically worry about the speed, because the speed is injected and is sent to the autothrottle system by the FMS. But in case we were using a manual mode, we wouldn't want to stay at 151 forever. After 151, which is the V2, when we start accelerating, we will want to accelerate to 250. To do that, it would mean to take this knob and to scroll it manually all the way to 250, which is quite tedious. And also need to remember that it's 250 while you're in a high workload phase of the flight. So what we do, we can preset that speed. We click it, we see preset, and we turn to pre-select the initial climb speed. Today is 250, but you need to check your charts because it could be less. It could be a turn at 220, at 200. So the first speed is what you would enter over here. In this case, 250. Once you enter 250, you leave it on preset. You don't click it again because V2 remains 151 and you have to pre-select it at 250. At this point, altitude selector, initial cleared altitude, which in this case would be 4,000, goes up in increments of 100, but if you click it, it goes in increments of 1,000. So we put 4,000. We can also do the heading select. Instead of having to do it later once we're on the runway, we do it now. 258. Not the fastest. No, that's the only drawback I can find in the INI builds. It's a bit tedious. Over here, 258, and there we go. Oxygen mask, we test oxygen flow. So over here, the oxygen mask, hidden next to our left leg. Press here, and we can hear the oxygen. Now, GPWS normal. We can find that here. Terrain mode GPWS. We check that is on normal, so on the upper position instead of flap override or off. And we check that the fold light is not illuminated. There we go. ND we check for correct display. ND is the navigation display. This one over here. Cross check ND and RMI heading with standby compass. So here we're pointing at 348 roughly. The RMI is here, and we're there again, 350, 348, and we check it against the standby compass. Standby compass is over here, and it's 348, so that checks. There we go, Joe. We skip that, and this one was if they weren't matching, but again it's the same, so it will always match. And then we check ground speed is 0, initial waypoint is KKW07, as we said, that's the first waypoint, and the VOR indication, we don't have them at the moment. Then standby airspeed indicator, we check we're on 0, and the PFD we check for correct display, so we check ES 0, we check FMA, oh sorry, ground speed earlier on the ND was ground speed over here, while the ES indicated airspeed is here on 0. FMA, vertical speed and heading is what you would expect on the A300, the A310. Initial target altitude is 4,000, and the altitude makes sense, we're flat on the ground. So that's all checked. Vertical speed indication, we check that there's no flags and is on 0. Altimeters, we check there are no warning flags, and we set the QNH. We can fetch it from here, the QNH. Oh, actually, do we print? No, we didn't print. Let's get an updated. This is the meter. That's been printed, and the QNH is 1002. So we go here, and we set 1002. That's a little quirk. I'm sure they are so thorough that I can't think they got it wrong, but to set the QNH on this altimeter you use the right knob, while on this one you use the left one. Seems weird because this knob is identical to this one, but on this one it sets the altitude, and on this one it sets the bug over here for the warning. But I would like to ask that Inibuilds a question. But anyway, we set both. So we set the QNH 1002, 1002. Clock, we check the time and adjust if necessary. It's always right in the sim, so we don't need to worry about that. The chrono is on 0, so the chrono is here. So if you start, then stop, and then a third click to reset and then this one we stop it, we reset it. Then standby altimeter, as we said, we set the QNH. ECAM, we press recall. If you take your ECAM over here, we press recall on the center of pedestal, hold recall, and there are no messages. If there was anything, any warning message, it would be here at this point. So that's been checked. Brake anti-skid, normal and on. Engine instruments, oil pressure is 0. This is the pressure, it's on 0. Oil quantity, check. Minimum oil quantity before start is 10 quarters plus estimated consumption. So we have 16 to 18 quarts, so absolutely fine. Fuel flow indicator is 0. N2 indicator needles and counters, we check that they're on 0. No flags and red marks pointers in front of the red limit mark. For the N1 over here, N1 is on 0. The red marks pointers over here is in front of the red limit mark. So this is the limit of the engine, and this one is what you're limiting on the day, because if you use toga or if you use flex takeoff, that will change. At this point we check that the reverser and reverser unlocked lights are extinguished. So once you activate the reverse, it's in a relatively unfortunate position because they're not really visible for center point of views, but they are here. These are the reverse. You can see paint reverse and reverse unlocked. Then thrust rating panel, toga, flex, auto, set. So how do we decide whether we need toga? We can always use toga. It's the same, we don't care about burning fuel, but here it tells us that we can use flex 50. So we're gonna enter flex 50. So I switch to auto, that would be toga, and today we're gonna use a flex of 50. As you can see now, the needle is here. So we check that the TAT is logical. So the total air temperature, we're on the ground at Gatwick and it's 16 degrees. And then we check that the thrust limit bugs correspond to the thrust limit display. So here, thrust limit display is 98.9, and this one makes sense, 98.9. Landing gear panel. We check that the warning test push button, we press it. Observe down arrow illuminates, continuous repetitive chime sounds, and NICAM system activates. Position. System 1, System 2. System 1 on odd days, System 2 on even days, to use them both. Today is an even day, so we put System 2. Landing elevation set. We set departure field elevation here because we don't know whether we're going to have an engine failure or not, and we're coming back or not. So just as a safety measure, as it would be very easy to forget that on an incredibly high workload situation like an engine failure and coming back, at that point we put the landing elevation of the departure airfield. So in Gatwick is 200 feet, scroll the knob, it's 50, 100, 150, 200. Now pedestal, we check the ADF, check and set as required. The ADF will be set here, we don't need it because we have enough departure, so we don't need that. Radius, we check that the intercom knob is turned up to enable ground crew contact, so we can check a VHF receive, intercom receive, turn the knob up, especially if you're on VATSIM, make sure you activate these, otherwise they won't hear you. And then you can also click on this one, maybe it's easier to see here, to activate. So this is to transmit and this is to listen. Now, well, intercom would be used, it's not used in this sim, it would be used to speak to ground crew. But we simulate it and we put it on. At that point, VHF, we check the VHF transmission and reception, and HF. We're not going to use HF, so HF, we leave it there, we leave it off. Weather radar, we check that it's off, so weather radar is over here, the knob is here, off, and the system is off. You have system 2, system 1, and we leave it off. You wouldn't play with that on the ground, by the way, if in reality you don't want to microwave people on the apron. Parking brake, we check that is off or as required. At the moment we need it on because we'll remove the chokes soon. ATC, standby. So here it splits ATC and TCAS because they're two different systems. But here it's all together if you use this radio panel. So you can ignore one of the two. So we'll leave it in standby, and it is in standby. VOR ILS course frequency as required. You could set VOR manually if you need it, as we said before, but we don't. And then we do final steps, FMS data confirmation. So we check the IRS Align, we check the coordinates, but we've already checked them before, so we have the coordinates correct. FMS gross weight insertion. At this point, the pilot not flying will check the FMS data. So we were the pilot entering the data. The pilot not flying would double check all the data. So we check all this data, fuel, zero fuel weight, takeoff weights, and so forth and so on. And it would calculate on its own the takeoff data. So we would do the same thing over here and cross-check that it makes sense over here. FMS flight plan, and again the pilot not flying ensures that the inserted flight plan agrees with the planned route. We've already checked that, we're confident this is correct. And we can do one extra check, so if company policy requires it, thoroughly check the whole flight plan using the scroll key. Use ND plan mode while scrolling. So we take our ND, we put it into plan, we go down, wherever you are, you go back onto flight plan, and then you use the arrow to scroll all your plan and make sure there are no discontinuities, and it all makes sense. Looks good to me. So that's okay, we put it back onto map. Airfield data, confirm, we have them. Flight recorder, check. Recheck that the FDR and the FDAU lights are extinguished. They were here and they are extinguished. Fuel quantity. We checked the fuel quantity. Our plan told us that we needed 19, so we have 19.0. Fuel pumps, normal. So at this point we can start the fuel pumps. All of them. And then we can cross-check with the sum of the individual tank quantities. So we have 5.9, 5.9, that's 11.8, plus 7.2, 18, and 19.0. So that's correct. And it matches what we see here, 19.0. Check fuel load asymmetry within limits. So we can check either on the fuel page, there's no fuel asymmetry, and this is the same as we see over here. At this point, we would do a takeoff briefing. Now read here, the purpose of the takeoff briefing is for the pilot flying to confirm the pilot non-flying of the planned course of action for both normal and abnormal situations during takeoff. It is also a recall of standard emergency procedures, and is the time for the captain to give any specific instructions to the first officer. It should be completed prior to engine start. It's most important that the takeoff briefing is given at the time when cockpit workload is low, so that both pilots may concentrate on its content, and at the time when the takeoff conditions are likely to be known. The most appropriate time, therefore, is at the end of the cockpit preparation prior to start, which is now. Takeoff briefing should include the following: a review of the emergency procedure relating to the takeoff. So for example, this will be a left-hand seat takeoff. If any malfunction occurs before V1, I will call stop or go. And you can read all this stuff yourself, because this is only for the first flight of the day, is the emergency briefing. And it just highlights the actions in case of an engine failure or any other problem. Having completed the emergency briefing, which normally needs only be done in full on the first flight of the day for the crew, a review of the variable procedures must be made, making use of the CDU where possible. So we want to do this just to recap all the actions. So runway state, it's dry, it's not raining. Weather expected after takeoff, which is good because it's a lovely day today. Use of anti-ice won't be needed because we said that the temperature is good enough, below +8 for this plane, but we are above +16, so we don't expect there are no clouds. Oh, there are clouds. Maybe once we start climbing we can think about engine anti-ice, but not for takeoff. Takeoff configuration. So let's pop this out so it's going to be a little bit easier to do this. Now takeoff configuration, we click on takeoff. There we go. Configuration is going to be 15-15, so slats and flaps 15. V1, VRV2, 148, 149, 151. Flex temp 50. Packs on or off. It's a long runway. We can keep the packs on. Single engine acceleration altitude, thrust reduction altitude, normal acceleration altitude. They're all 1,000 feet above airfield, so we have them all here. 190 is the airfield altitude. So 1,000 above that. First clear level, we have it entered here. We can check it on the FMA. 4,000, and we have that entered 4,000, and we can check it against the charts again. So 4,000, that's correct. Terminal area topography and minimum safe altitude. So terminal area topography, we check whether there's any particular terrain around us. Minimum safe altitude in the sector we're flying is 2,100. Right. Also, one thing that is missing here is the taxi briefing. So we're parked at 52. We're going to be departing from 26 left, so it's going to be down a straight taxi by, actually we take Papa all the way down left on Alpha to holding point Mike 3 for Mike. Seat routing. We will check it on the flight plan page. We have the Novum 1 X-ray. We checked it already earlier, so we know the routing is correct. So we're going to go straight ahead to Kilo Kilo Whiskey 07, then Kilo Kilo Whiskey 09, and then left turn for Midhurst. Use of radar. We will not need the terrain radar, so we will leave the weather radar. There we go. So that's all done. Takeoff data, prepare and check, revise. Now, this would be if, as we said before, we received the final load sheet from the company. If we edit now, we will go and check, modify the FMS weights and CG. So we go on to the Inibuilds page and check or modify these. Confirm takeoff weight limitation. To extend the engine life and save maintenance costs, the use of flaps configuration given the highest flex temperature is recommended. However, when the difference in terms of flex temperature between two configurations is low, the highest takeoff configuration is preferable. So what does that mean? We now decided to use 15-15. Let's see, flex is 50, so let's do 15-20 and see if there's a very big gain in flex temperature. Because the higher the flex temperature, the lower the engines run. So you extend the life of the engines. But this is 52, so it's only 2 degrees. So this is less than 5 degrees. So it is not worth it. So at this point, the highest takeoff configuration is preferable. So the highest as in 15-15. Well, technically, you can do the same experiment and say 15-0. 15-0 is 50. So this is actually preferable. So what we're going to do, now we're going to do actually 15-15 so I can show you on departure the procedure of how to retract the flaps. So we'll leave that like that for now. Then we enter the flex temperature and select flex on the thrust racing panel, unless TOGA is required, which is what we did before. So we don't need to amend it, we're keeping the same. Check V2 and green dot speed on standby ASI. Let's go on to takeoff performance. V2 is 151 and it's here. That's set automatically by the plane, otherwise you will have to do it manually in real life. And then a green dot, which is clean speed, is 216, and that's already there. PF enters or revises the takeoff data in the FMS CDU takeoff performance. That's already done. Check cruise flight level is not above max flight level. So we go on to the prog page. See, the cruise flight level that we entered is 360, the max level is 369, the optimal is 341. So we can actually go on the init page A and modify cruise flight level and put 340 because the optimal is 341. So we want to always fly as close as possible to the optimal, because if we go higher, we burn more fuel. So we'll enter 340. That will likely change the fuel calculations. As you can see, now the extra time is recalculated to 1.2 instead of the extra fuel, 1.2 tons instead of 2 tons. Because if you were to do the whole flight at 340, you will burn more. But that's way beyond the scope of this, so just make sure that the cruise level is as close to the optimal as you can without burning too much fuel. You could recalculate the Simbri flight plan to say 340 if you wanted to be really thorough, but we'll leave it there. Whilst we're on the prog page, on the bearing distance, we put our coming back runway. So if you have an engine failure, we said we're gonna come back to Gatwick, we'll put it there, but I wrote EGLL, which is Heathrow. So there we go, and we have that. At this point, seatbelts, harnesses, rudder, pedals, we check that everything is adjusted. CDU in the takeoff configuration, which means it is recommended to display flight plan on the pilot non-flying side over here, and the takeoff performance on the PF side, the pilot flying side. APU, at this point we will start it. So we come over here, master switch to on for the APU, and then we can start. We can monitor the start over here. The ECAM changes automatically to the APU page. Take a few seconds. Now the EGT starts increasing, and the N1 as well. There's a standby instruments over here for the APU, so you can see the same indications over here at the back. So we let that run. Then we need to confirm that the APU avail light is on. So once it spools up enough, that's it. This one has gone off and it switches to available. At this point, the APU is available to take the electrical load. We want to reconfirm that by, so let's pop out the screen and we check the AC ECAM page. So here we say AC, and we can see APU generator is generating power. So we are definitely ready to take the electrical load on the APU. That means we can turn the external power off. External power is here. It's off. Once we turn it off, we can request to remove the external power. So we go on to ground ops, ground services, remove the external power. At this point, we double check that we have the parking brake on. It's on, so we can remove the chocks as well. Now time for before start checklist down to the line. So we take the checklist over here. Before start checklist down to the line. Cockpit preparation has been completed. Signs. On the seatbelt and auto, the no smoking. Where were we? Fuel quantity. We check 19.0, and it's indicated here in the lower right of the ECAM. Navigation has been checked, landing elevation has been set, and we have 200 set there for Gatwick. Altimeter set on, we double check what they're set on, so 1002, 1002. We also check, when we're doing this check, we check that the altitude makes sense. We should be normally within 20-30 feet, it's now indicating 230, so that makes sense, but just to be on the safe side, we can check that in the meantime the meter has not changed. So we go back to ACAR ATC weather request, and we do another request for Gatwick 1001. You see, we spotted that because it was a little bit too high. Here the altitude was a little bit too much, and then that told us that the QNH changed. So at this point we set it to 1001. There we go. And that's more likely 200. That's why we have checklists. Braking, anti-skid, it's normal and on. There we go. Before start checklist, down to the line, complete. Pushback or as start clearance. This stage, the before start preparation is stopped to obtain ground crew clearance for pushback, chocks, and etc. So what we can do, we can plan our better pushback. Push. We're going to push onto there, which looks reasonable. There we go. Windows and doors, check closed. Check cockpit windows closed and locked. Well, you can open them in this model, so they're definitely locked. Check on ECAM door page that all doors are closed. So there we go. All the doors are closed, otherwise they would be in orange. So they are all closed. If you had them open, you can go over here and ground ops exit, and you can close them or open them individually over here. Close all. There we go. Cockpit door toggle switch lock, then normal, that's over here. Very handy position. Not. Cockpit door normal and then lock. There we go, the light is extinguished. Beacon on. We're ready to go, so we can turn now the beacon on. ATC on as required, then TCAS set to alt off. That's normally Europe and other countries, or TRA like in the States. So we are in Europe, so we're going to go here, tune page, and we put alt off, which is 4 clicks. APU bleed at this point. The APU has been running for more than a minute. Normally you don't put the APU bleed straight away after you started the APU, you just let it stabilize, and it can't get burnt oil and etc. Getting into the smell, getting into the cabin fumes. So let it stabilize, warm up, and then APU go on. As you put the APU on, you can see now the packs have come alive. The bar is in line, and you can see you have pressure. So always double check that you have pressure, because you need that pressure for engine start. Then before start checklist, down to the line. Go back to the before start checklist. Sorry, below the line, not down to the line. So below the line, windows and doors are closed. Beacon is with always double check on, and the parking brake is on. Before start checklist, below the line completed. At this point, parking brake as required. So we can disconnect the parking brake, and the pushback will commence, and the pilot non-flying clock starts. So at this point we want to monitor the block time, which is from gate to gate. So we release the parking brake, and we start the time over here. We move it to run. There we go. At this point we check that we can start the engines. We can check that the throttle levers are idle. There we go, they're both on idle. And we can start the engine. Now, what's going to happen with the engine start? We set the ignition to start. Now, start A odd days or start B even days. So, put it to start B. And check both arm lights illuminate on start 1 and start 2 push button. There we go. Engine 2 is normally started first. So what we're going to do, we're going to start engine 2. Check the arm white lights extinguished. So this light will extinguish. The open blue light will illuminate. And then we will monitor the rest of the parameters. So let's do that together. Okay, let's get it started. So start engine number 2. Blue open light illuminates. So we announce valve open. We check N2, so N2 is rising, so we announce N2. Oil pressure will start to rise. You can see the needle here starting, so we have oil pressure. At 15% N2 minimum, fuel lever on. We are now on N2 of 21. So we can start engine number 2. At this point we observe the fuel flow rising, EGT is rising, and N1 is rising. So you see fuel on, EGT, N1, and N2. When N2 gets to 45, the valve closes, so that blue light goes back to arm white. Now set parking brake.
Disconnecting tow, stand by.
There we go. At idle, N1 is around 24% at sea level. N2 is about 58, and EGT about 400. Fuel flow about 600 kilograms. So you see this is 1000, this is 500, so this is around 600. That's good, so we have a good engine start. We'll also check the secondary parameters over here, that everything is in the green. And we're good. Now we can start engine number 1. Valve open. We have N2. Oil pressure above 15. We enter the fuel. We have fuel flow, EGT, N1. EGT is good. It's not too hot. And then we go and monitor that at 45% of N2. So in a few seconds, the valve should close. There we go. Back to arm. Check the idle parameters. EGT goes up and then stabilizes. Secondary indications are all good. There we go, stabilized it. 24, 460, 246. 6 is a good rule of thumb. So 2466. All good. At this point, ignition goes to off. And then you've heard the bleeds came back. So unlike a 737, when you need to turn the bleeds off for engine start, that's done automatically. When you turn, you can hear now the airflow. When you turn the ignition to on, the airflow stops. And so that's all done automatically. When we go APU master switch to off. Engine warm up after start to ensure engine thermal stabilization. the engine should be operated at idle or near idle for at least 3 minutes. So what we do, we start the chrono over here, so the actual chrono, not the timer, and there we go. So we wait for 3 minutes. Taxi time at idle may be included in the warm-up period, so of course, so you can taxi at idle without waiting for the engines to be warmed up. We lost the zoom. There we go. Engine anti-ice as required. We said we're not going to need it, so we'll leave it there. Icing conditions may be expected when outside air temperature or total air temperature is below +8 with visible moisture. There's no visible moisture. We are at 16, so we're good. Wing anti-ice, again, we don't need it. I keep messing up the zoom. Slats and flaps, sets for takeoff. We said we're going to use 15-15, so we're going to set slats and flaps to 15-15. If the OIT is below -40, extend the slats and flaps step by step. And if taxiing in slash conditions, keeps the slats and flaps retracted until reaching the holding point before takeoffs. So if there was a lot of snow and slash on the ground, you don't want to put down the slats and flaps because they could could be thrown by the front wheel or by the back wheel in the slats. In the slats and flaps, so you don't want that. Ground spoilers on. There we go. Aileron trim, rudder trim, those are always default in explain, so there's not much point in checking them, but there they are. Pitch trim we set for takeoff. We have it on the page, on the takeoff per page, so 1.3 up. So we now go and set the trim here. 1.3 up. ECAM, we check the status. So we take the ECAM, we press the status, and we have normal status. Then we press clear, and we put it back to normal. ECAM door page, select. So we select the door page, and all the doors are closed. And all the slides are armed, so slide everywhere. Now we're clear to disconnect. Ground crew must be ensure chocks removed, so well, ground crew is already gone, so we can do now the after start checklist. So pitch trim has been set to up 1.3 and it matches what's on the takeoff per page. Rudder trim is on 0, spoilers are armed, we can see the red band. Slats and flaps 15-15 planned, 15-15 set. ECAM status is check, anti-ice not required, and hand signal has been received. We didn't pay attention to the lovely guy who pushed us back, who's now gone, but he's gone. Now nose light to taxi. Day and night. Taxi clearance obtained. We would ask, of course, ATC for taxi clearance. And if we had it, parking brake goes off. Release the parking brake and check brake pressure 0. So there we are. Parking brake is off. And brake pressure goes to 0. And last time we've done it when we pushed back, so that's all done. Thrust levers. In order to get the aircraft moving, little, if any, power above idle thrust will be required, maximum 40% N1. So if left long enough, it will start very slowly. You can see very, very slowly, painfully slowly, is already taxiing. You can see here the corner, but we want to give it a little nudge, so up to 40%. N1 is acceptable. So we give it a little help. This is what is called, I believe, the break off power. So you give a little bit of power just to break off, but then you put it back to idle. There we go. Brakes. We check the brakes. So what we do, we call brake check. We squeeze the brakes and we check them. When squeezing the brakes, the pressure stays to 0. So the actual call is, yeah, brake check, and we answer pressure 0. You can do as well this longer check, but for the sake of brevity, we will not do that today. Now, why we did that? We did that, just to explain why we did it. Because if normally, under normal circumstances, when you start the engine, the braking is taken over by the yellow. One second, let me taxi there. So when it's off, is yellow, because yellow does the parking brake. But once the engines are started and everything is up and running, the normal braking system is taken over by the green system. So this is yellow brake pressure. What is indicating in the brake pressure indicator here is yellow system pressure. So because it has been taken over by the green system now that the engines are on, we don't want to see that rising. If that was rising, it means that we're on alternate brakes. So another test you can do, you can put the brakes on alternate, and now when braking with the pedals, you will see pressure rising because you're on yellow system. That was the purpose of it. Now ECAM, select the flight control page. So check the ECAM, select the flight controls page. Now we do flight controls. Let's normally do it on a straight, and we check the flight controls. So we say full down, pull up, neutral, pull left, pull right, neutral, and then rudder, pull left, pull right, neutral. You can deselect the flight control page. This is not automatic like the A320. But yeah, like the A320, if you force the certain page, then you need to deactivate it. Now, ATC clearance, at this point we would check that it's confirmed, whether we received it or not, or if there's any changes. If at this point ATC was to give us a different runway, different intersection, etc., we would need to check. If there was any changes to the plan, we would need to check that everything is correct. So we would double check again the sliver position, the V2, because we might have, of course, we would have redone the takeoff performance calculation, the flex temperature in the FMS, V1 and VR, reinsert the flight plan with revise the seat and transitions, the FCU as required. So we would check all this data, but we haven't had any changes from air traffic controller. So we go ahead, and if the profile nav mode is used, which is you enter the plan in the FMS, so we're going to use the profile mode, we activate profile and nav. Now on the FMA, below vertical speed and heading, you have the blue modes, which are the armed ones, profile, climb and nav. Okay, we can deactivate traffic global, so I'm not gonna have that to bother us. There we go. At this point we have FD check selected on, so we have the flight directors on. Oh sorry, I skipped one. Profile arm, nav arm, initial after takeoff heading we set on the FCU, and in this case we have the heading actually on the charts was 257 instead of 258, so we'll put 257, which doesn't matter because we'll be using nav, but in case nav didn't work and we needed to use heading, we have it selected. FD that on, and FMA we check. So we check the FMA, makes sense, and we have vertical speed, heading, profile, climb, nav, and that's all good. Flight instruments, we check that the instruments all make sense. Radar, select tilt at 4 up for takeoff and the radar goes on. So what we do, I'll stop before doing that. Never taxi. That's why we have two pilots. Never taxi and do other stuff. Just stop somewhere where you don't bother anybody and do your stuff. Now, I will be doing all these actions here. Stop at the holding point. You can normally do that because you have two pilots, but with one pilot, we will be taking a little bit of time here. If you're on VATSIM, don't do these actions here. Try and get all the taxi actions done before you start taxiing. So then you don't take the runway once you're cleared for too long. So I would strongly recommend to do everything while you're in an area where you don't bother anybody. So the radar goes up to 4 degrees. Now if we put this one here, we turn the weather radar on by turning rotary knob here to weather or turbulence, and then system 1 or 2. At this point you see the tilt, and it says tilt up 4 degrees, and you have it here, and you can see on your ND. Now terrain on ND, as we said, there's no terrain to worry us around, so we'll just put it on the pilot not flying. Takeoff briefing confirmed. This briefing should normally be only a brief confirmation of the thorough takeoff briefing made at the gate. Any changes in the clearance should be addressed at this time. As extensive use as possible of the display should be made. So takeoff on runway. Let's see, we have the takeoff page there. Takeoff on runway 26 left. Weight 150, so you have it on the left decam. So weight for us is 131.2, and one of the pilots will be checking that against the operational flight plan. So if we wanted to do it thoroughly, takeoff weight 130.5, we have 131.2 because we loaded a lot of extra fuel for the taxi. Slat flaps 15-15, we check it here, 15-15. Fuel left decam again, 18.6. Flex, we check it here, 50, and here, 50. 93% N1, this is an example, so we have 98.2% N1. The departure, we check it on the flight plan page, which is here on the first officer. So departure is November 1 X-ray from runway 26 left. V-speed 148, 149, 151 with a green dot speed of 216. And then initial clear altitude we see on the PFD 4000 and the SU 4000. Camera report received. Takeoff configuration test. Push button over here. We press it, and that would tell us if we have any problems with the takeoff configuration, but we don't, because we follow the checklist. And then ECAM is normal for takeoff. Before takeoff checklist down to the line over here. So flight controls have been checked, briefing is confirmed, slats and flaps 15-15, both performance FMS check read. So at this point you would check the performance and the FMA. So you say 26 left, and then we would read here. So I would read here, and the other pilot will check his FMA as well, and that matches there. So we have 148 V1, 151 V2, vertical speed and heading, FD1, which is the flight director, 4,000 feet is selected, which is what we just checked. And then we have a takeoff config has been checked, and the transponder is set. We didn't set it because we didn't receive the clearance, so we go in tune, we put a fictitious transponder code, and that has been done. So before takeoff checklist down to the line complete. At this point, takeoff all lineup clearance obtained, Approach path clear of traffic is clear. We don't have TCAS message there. We don't see anybody coming. Cabin crew will advise, so we just ping them. Cabin crew, seat for takeoff. Brake yellow hydraulic pressure, so make sure that there's no pressure left once you deactivate. There we go. Parking brakes are off. There's no residual pressure. Brake fan is off. Auto brake on max. There we go. Ignition continuous relight. If there was standing water or heavy rain or severe turbulence, we would put the ignition on, but there's none of that. We leave it off. Pack valve. We don't need increased takeoff performance, so we'll leave them off. ATC on. So at this point, we will put TCAS to TARA. External lights, we use everything. So nose takeoff, runway turn off, and the landing lights. We set the strobe lights to on, and we check the QFU at threshold. The QFU is the runway heading. So give it a little nudge. Clear left, clear right.
Approaching 26 left.
And there we go, we're lined up. So QFU, we knew it was 258, and we check, that makes sense, 258, 258, perfect. We stop here before takeoff checklist below the line. Cabin is secure, TCAS is TARA, and we double check it there, TRA. Packs are off, on, ignition as required, and it's off, anti-ice is off. Before takeoff checklist below the line completed. And that is it. So that's it for the first part of the tutorial. We've done all the cold and dark, and we're ready to take off. And now I'm gonna go and take a little break, and then we'll do the full flight. But this first video stops here, and I'll see you on the next one for the actual flight. Thank you very much, and see you on the next tutorial.